So have a good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing the chapter 5, which is the collecting quantitative data. So before we dive into our proper discussion, we have here our learning objectives. The first one we have here: state the 5 steps in the process of quantitative data collection. Then identify how to select participants for a study. Then identify the permissions needed for a study. List different options for collecting information. Locate, select, and assess an instrument to use in data collection. And lastly, we have here the described procedures for administering quantitative data collection. So 5 steps in the process of data collection. So these 5 steps includes the determining the participants to study, then obtaining their permission to be studied, then it could be from an individual or organization. So considering what type of information to collect from several sources, and then locating and selecting instruments to use that will be useful for the study, and finally administering the data collection processes to collect the data. So it simply means that we should not collect data and we should not select participants based on our judgments and choices, but there is a particular process that we need to follow for us to get the data rightfully and fairly. So what participants will you study? So this is the first step in the process of collecting quantitative data. So you should identify the people and places that you plan to study, and then determine how many you will need for your research. And then these are the decisions that you have to make. After that, you need to decide on a unit of analysis, whether, for instance, you select a particular organization or a school, and then you select a unit from that school for the respondents of your research. In identifying your unit of analysis, the sources of information could be students, teachers, parents, adults, or combination, depending on the type of research or the study that you have to make. So you have to choose what are the particular respondents that are suited for your research. So you could choose from these choices. And deciding on the unit of analysis, it could be also an individual, family, school, or a school district. So it really depends on your study. Alright, so for us to understand the concept of population and sample, we need to define these terms. So population is a group of individuals who have the same characteristics. So for example, teachers would make up the population of all teachers. And then a target population or the sampling frame is a group of individuals or a group of organizations with some common defining characteristics. And then the sample is a subgroup of the target population that the research plans to study. So those terms are distinct and different from each other, but those terms are interrelated and connected because that would help us to get the accurate number of participants that is needed for our study. So in the figure 5.1, this will allow us to understand the concept of population and sample. So for example here, all teachers in high school in one city. So those are the population or the total population of our study. But it is not possible for us to conduct that research in all teachers in one city because the numbers or their population is very large. So for us to narrow down their numbers, we need to get the sample from each unit for us to get each representative of each schools for our respondents of our research. So for now, probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling. So these are the researchers used as methods to get the number of their participants. So in probability sampling, the researcher selects individuals from the population who are representative of that population. So this is the most rigorous form of sampling in the quantitative research. And in the non-probabilistic sampling naman, these are based on the convenience and the availability of the respondents. So in the figure 5.2, we will be able to see the several types of these approaches or methods on getting the participants or respondents of your research. In the figure 5.2, the quantitative sampling strategies. So under the probability sampling, we have here the simple random sampling, stratified sampling, multi-stage cluster sampling, and then for non-probability sampling, we have here the convenience sampling and the snowball sampling. So simple random sampling, this is the most popular and rigorous form of probability sampling. So the intent of this method is to choose individuals to be sampled who will be representative of the population. But the bias of the researcher should be equally distributed among the people chosen. So how it should be done? So for example here, the researcher assigned random numbers to each student and then put them on a table and then select a particular column to be the representative of the population. So that would ensure the fairness and just selecting representative on a particular number of population. So in the table 5.1, we have here the different numbers, the random numbers chosen by a researcher, and then he select a particular column. So in the given example, he selected the first column, which are the 52, 31, 44, 84, 71, 42, 3, and 31. So those are the representative of this entire population. So those are the example of the random sampling method. So systematic sampling. So a slight variation of simple random sampling procedure. So this procedure is not as precise and rigorous as using random numbers table, but it may be more convenient because in the given number of population, for example, you will only need 20% of that particular population. So you will get the, for instance, if there were 1,000 parents in the school district, and the administrator would select 200 parents, or the 20% of that number of population for the study. So the administrator uses an interval of 5 to select parents from the mailing list of the target population list. So this is more convenient as compared to the random sampling method. And the next one, we have here the stratified sampling. So in this method, the researchers divide or stratify the population on some specific characteristics. For example, gender. And then using a sample random sampling from each subgroup, and the subgroup is called the stratum of the population. So this guarantees that the sample will include a specific characteristics that the researcher wants include in the sample. So stratification is also used when a simple random sampling procedure would yield fewer participants in a specific category. So in the figure 5.3, it shows a stratification sampling approach. So the given example here, we have the 9,000 as the total population, and it is composed of 6,000 boys and 3,000 girls. And then for us to get the random sampling of each population, 6,000 divided into 9,000 to get the 0.66 of that population, and then 3,000 is divided into 9,000 to get the 0.33 of population. So the 0.66 of population is 200, and the 0.33 of population is 100. So that resort to the researcher's choice, which is to get the sample of 3,000 respondents for their research. And then we have here the multi-stage cluster sampling. So multi-stage cluster sampling involves selecting sample in multiple stages. So it is also used and the population is hard to identify or extremely large. So it is usually used when the respondents of a particular study is really large and it is needed for it to be narrowed down. So the possible to obtain list of groups or cluster in population. So it is also randomly select school district, obtain list at risk, and students in each district. So using multi-stage cluster sampling, so the researcher randomly selects school and district in the United States and obtains a list of at-risk students in each of those school districts. Then the researcher randomly samples within each district, breaking down the process like this makes it easier to identify groups and locate lists. So basically, this is used when the population is very large. Alright, so let's proceed to the non-probability sampling. So this method is based on the availability, convenience, and the representation of sought-after characteristics. It also the involvement of the volunteers who agrees to participate. So it is far different from the probability sampling that we have discussed earlier. So the first example of this non-probability sampling is the convenience sampling. It is based on the willingness and availability of participants, but the researcher cannot confidently claim representativeness of the population because it is more reliant on the willingness and availability of the respondents. The example here is the researcher studies Native American students in one school due to the availability and permission from the principal. So the researcher doesn't have any choice but to choose that particular organization because that is the only organization that chose to be studied and who volunteered to be studied. And the next one we have here, the snowball sampling. It is the alternative to convenience sampling, and the researcher asked participants to identify others to become members of the sample. So it basically means that the main participants of the study recruits some other members to be included in the number of participants. So the example here, the researchers sent surveys to a school superintendent and asked that superintendent to forward the copies to the principals of schools in that school district. So those principals then become members of the sample. But then there are advantages and disadvantages of this sampling. So that the advantages is it recruits large number of participants, but it doesn't have a but it has lack of control over sample composition. So inability to identify non-respondents, so potential lack of representativeness. So for the sample size, so the general rule here is to select as large as sample as possible because the large sample reduces potential sampling error. So the researcher should choose a large number of samples. So the example here is obtaining scores from 6th graders across the country. So sample scores may vary due to the different sample of composition. So it needs for a larger sample to minimize sampling error. So yeah. So sample size formula. So it means for the calculating of sample size based on factors. So use formula to precise estimation. So a researcher should not do computation of the sample size without a particular formula because it will resort to the sampling error. So there are two formulas, which are the sampling for error formula for survey and then the power analysis formula for experiments. And then what permission will you need? So you need to obtain permission from selected participants. So you cannot conduct study without their permission because it is the invalidation of rights. And it makes sure also that they ensure cooperation and data provision. Acknowledges understanding of study purpose and ethical treatment. So before you conduct your study, you need first to explain what is your study all about for the clarification of both parties. And then the federal legislation mandates guaranteeing rights and requesting permission. So obtain different types of permission. So you could obtain your permission from the institution or the organizations. So specific sites, a participant or a group participants, parents of participants in the campus in which you conduct the research. So those are the several factors that you need to ask for permissions for in order for you to conduct your study. And then under the obtain different types of permission, you need permission often required before data collection. So it is really necessary for you to get their permission first before conducting. And approval typically from organizational leaders. And then formal letters, best way to request permission. So letter should include the purpose of your study, duration of data collection, participant time commitment, data usage, specific activities, benefits to organization or individual, and then provisions for anonymity protection. So providing information demonstrates concern for inclusion and sets realistic expectations. So this will allow both the respondents and to those leaders of that particular organizations to be clear on the purpose of your study and what are the benefits that it could give to the respondents and to your study. So it is important to protect the privacy and confidentiality of individuals who participate in the study. And an institutional review board is a committee made up of the faculty members who review and approve research so that the research protects the rights of the participants. So it is really necessary for it to be reviewed so that it will ensure that there are no malicious content in your particular study, and it should not be harmful to the respondents as well, and it should be safe for the respondents to read, to understand, and to digest. So there are process of obtaining approval from the review boards. The first one, we have to start finding out about the review process used by the institutional review boards on your campus, and then determine what information the review board needs about your project. So this will allow you to revise and to observe your questions and your letter, to determine on what are the particular things that the review boards needs to see, and then develop an informed consent form for participants to sign before they participate in the study, and then submit a description of your proposed study to the institutional review board. So those are the processes that you need to undergo before conducting or collecting a data collection in the quantitative research. And then an informed consent is a statement that participants sign before they participate in the research. So there are a particular consent or letter that the participants should sign before answering your questions or your study. So these in the figure 5.4, this is an example of an informed consent which contain title, voluntary participation, right to withdraw, purpose, procedures, and right to ask questions, no to risk, benefits, signature, and information about investigator. So that would be all for my part. Thank you.
So, good day everyone, and now we will proceed to the next part. So, this paragraph is discussing the next steps in the research process after identifying participants and gaining permission. So, the next step is to determine the specific type of data that will be collected to answer the research questions or hypothesis. In other words, it's about deciding what kind of information will be gathered to support the research objectives. And also this step involves identifying the variables and considering types of information that will help you assess these variables. A process outlined in figure 5.5 using the variable self-efficacy. So, these steps involves identifying the variables of interest and determining what kind of information will help in assessing these variables. So in this figure, we will find out the flow of activities in collecting data. So we have identified the variable. So identifying the variables is crucial in the flow of activities when collecting data because it helps to ensure that the data collected is relevant to the research questions or hypothesis. By clearly defining the variables of interest, researchers can focus their data collection efforts on gathering information that directly relate these variables. This ensures that the data collected will be meaningful and useful for analyzing and interpreting the research findings. This paragraph explains that once researchers have operational definition for their variables, they need to identify the types of data that will measure these variables. So researchers collect data using instruments, which are tools designed for measuring, observing, or documenting quantitative data. In other words, researchers choose the specific methods or tools they will use to collect data that align with their operational definitions of the variables being studied. These instruments ensure that data collection is consistent, reliable, and valid. So this paragraph explains that performance measures are collected to assess an individual's ability in various domains, such as achievement, intelligence, aptitude, interest, or personality. These measures are available through instruments that have been reported in the literature. Additionally, past research has established norms for this test, providing a reference point for interpreting an individual's performance relative to others. In other words, researchers use established instruments to collect data on performance measures, and they can compare an individual's performance to establish norms to evaluate their abilities in different areas. So as you can see, in this figure, we have types of quantitative data and measure. So first is we have types of data. First is measure of individual performance. Next is measures of individual attitude. Next is observation of individual behavior. And lastly, the functional information. So, and also we have here the types of tests, instruments or documents to collect data. First is achievement test or norm reference test. So the definition of this is, so it is a test where the individual's grade is a measure of how well he or she did in comparison with a large group of takers. The second one is the criterion reference test. So it is a test where the individual's grade is a measure of how well he or she did in comparison to a criterion or score. Next is intelligence test, a test that measures an individual intellectual activity. Next is aptitude test, a test to measure a person's ability to estimate how they will perform at some time in the future or in a different situation. Next is the interest inventory, a test that provides information about an individual interest and helps them make career choices. So, we have another example here, but it is quite long. If I will also explain this one. So this paragraph discusses attitudinal measures which are used to assess individuals' feelings or attitudes towards educational topics. So, attitudinal measures quantify people's opinions, beliefs, or feelings on specific educational subjects. So, researchers can develop their own question to measure attitudes, or they can use existing instruments designed for this purpose. So attitudinal measures provide quantitative data that can be collected through survey or questionnaire. So overall, attitudinal measures help researchers understand individuals' perceptions and attitudes toward educational topics, providing valuable insights for educational research and evaluation. So this is the example of how an instrument measures attitudes. In this figure, it is a sample of an instrument that measures attitudes. Behavioral observation involves observing and recording specific behaviors using a checklist or scoring sheet. So, the advantage of this method is that it allows researchers to directly observe and record an individual actual behavior rather than relying on self-reported views or perceptions. So, an example of a behavioral observation instrument is the measurement of inappropriate and disruptive interactions, or MITI, which was developed and used in the Sabretooth project to study physical education curriculum changes in middle school. So, this scoring sheet includes codes that observers use to record observed behaviors, along with a legend explaining the codes. So, for example, the codes might indicate the context of the behavior. So, the type of behavior is inactive, descriptive, and the extent of the behavior. Individual group. So, training observers are trained in scoring procedures to ensure consistency in scoring behavior in the Sabretooth project. Observers were cued by an audio tape recording to mark their observations on the checklist sheet. Overall, behavioral observation is a valuable method for collecting data on specific behaviors, providing researchers with objective and detailed information about individuals' actions in various contexts. Next is the functional information. So factual information from public educational records and personal documents offers researchers access to quantitative data that can be used for various research purposes, including analysis of academic performance, educational outcomes, and demographic trends. So this is the example of observational scoring sheet with fictitious data. So next is, this paragraph discusses the popularity of web-based electronic data collection in quantitative research. So, researchers commonly use websites and the internet for data collection purposes. So, web-based electronic data collection involves administering surveys, gathering interview data, or assessing existing databases for analysis. So, examples of web-based data collection methods include administering surveys online, conducting interviews through web platforms, and analyzing existing databases available such as the Texas Lotto, U.S. Census Bureau, or Lewis Harris Pool. So next is how to decide what types to choose. So, confronted by these many options for collecting quantitative data, which one or ones will you use to select your data sources? Ask yourself the following question. So first is, what am I trying to learn about participants from my research question and hypothesis? If we are trying to learn about individual behaviors of parents at a student-parent conferencing meeting, then you could use a behavioral checklist and record observation. If you are trying to measure the attitudes of teachers toward a band issue, attitudinal question or an attitudinal instrument will be required. Next is, what information can you realistically collect? So some types of data may not be collectible in a study because individuals are unwilling to supply it. For example, precise data on the frequency of substance abuse in middle school may be difficult to collect. Identifying the number of students suspensions for substance abuse is much more realistic. And lastly, how do the advantages of the data collection compare with its disadvantages? In our discussion of each data source, we have talked about the ideal situation for data collection. Given the ease or difficulty of collecting data, each type needs to be assessed. Next is, this paragraph explains the options available to researchers for obtaining an instrument to use in their study. So, researchers can create their own instrument tailored to their specific research needs. So, alternatively, researchers can locate an already established instrument that fits their requirements, and this option is often the easiest approach as it saves time and resources. So, the researchers may also choose to modify an existing instrument to better suit their research objectives. So overall, the paragraph emphasizes that locating an existing instrument is often the simplest and most efficient option for researchers. So next, if you choose to use an existing instrument, you may need to pay a fee to the publisher or author for the right to use the instrument. Using an existing instrument often involves contacting the publisher or author and negotiating a fee for its use. This fee compensates the publisher or author for the development and distribution of the instrument. So, overall, by using an existing instrument, you can save time and effort. Researchers should be prepared to incur costs associated with obtaining the necessary permissions for its use. So as you can see in the picture, it is the steps in developing or constructing an instrument. So to locate instruments for their study, researchers can run an ERIC search. So they can search the ERIC, which means Educational Resources Information Center System, using the term instrument along with the specific topic of their study. ERIC provides access to a wide range of educational research literature, including information on various instruments used in research. Examine guides to test an instrument. Researchers can explore commercially available guides such as the mental measurements.
Now, let's proceed to the reliability and validity. Are scores on past use of the instrument reliable and valid? Scores on past use of an instrument need to be both reliable and valid. Reliability ensures that scores remain stable and consistent over repeated administrations. So while validity ensures that the interpretation of scores matches the intended use of the instrument. Validity encompasses various types of evidence such as content, criterion, and construct validity, all contributing to the overall validity of the instrument. But selecting an instrument with reliable and valid individual scores is crucial for meaningful and accurate assessment. Reliability and validity are interconnected concepts in assessing the choice of an instrument. While reliability focuses on consistency, the other one, the validity, encompasses the accuracy of the instrument's scores for their intended purpose. Reliability is the prerequisite for validity. When we say prerequisite, the scores must be stable and consistent before they can be considered meaningful. Therefore, while reliability is easier to grasp, validity is the broader and more crucial consideration while selecting an instrument. The goal of a good research is to ensure reliable measures or observations. Unreliable data can result from factors such as ambiguous questions, inconsistent tests, procedures, and misinterpretation. Therefore, researchers strive to minimize these issues to ensure the reliability of their data. Researchers can use any one or more of 5 available procedures to examine an instrument's reliability. The first one is the test-retest reliability. Is where participants complete the same instrument twice at different time intervals to assess consistency over time. The test-retest reliability procedure, it examines the extent to which scores from one sample are stable over time from one test to another. To determine this form of reliability, the researcher administers the test at 2 different times to the same participant at the sufficient time interval. Second one is the alternate forms reliability. These types of procedures to examine the instrument reliability is the participants complete 2 different versions of the same concept or variable to determine if both versions yield consistent result. The number 3 is the alternate forms and retest reliability. Participants complete 2 different versions of the same concept of variable twice at different time intervals to assess both consistency over time and across different versions. The next one is the iterator reliability. Multiple individuals observe participant behavior, aiming to ensure consistency in interpretation among observers. So the iterator reliability is a procedure used when making observations of behavior. It involves observations made by 2 or more individuals of an individual's or several individuals' behavior. The observers record their scores of the behavior and then compare scores to see if their score are similar or different. Number 5 is the internal consistency reliability. The participants complete the same instrument once, assessing the consistency of responses within the instrument. If someone completes items at the beginning of the instrument one way, then they should answer the questions later in the instrument in a similar way. Quantitative research encompasses a range of principles and practices aimed to ensure the rigor, reliability, and validity of the research findings. So these are the validity evidences. The first evidence is the evidence based on test. Evidence based on test content examines whether a test scores reflect what it's supposed to measure. It's crucial for test assessing achievement, credentials, or job sustainability. The focus is on ensuring that the test content aligns with intended purposes. The second one is the evidence based on response processes. Response processes evidence assesses how well a test aligns with the behavior or thought processes of those completing it or conducting observations. It examines how individuals interact with the test and whether the responses match the construct being measured. So the next one is the internal structure evidence. It examines if the test score interpretation are consistent with the instrument conceptual framework. This involves statistical analysis to assess the relationship among test items and parts, aligning with the concept of construct validity. So the next one is the evidence based on relations to other variables. This type of evidence checks if scores on a test match with other things we expect them to be related to. Researchers look at how scores on a test compare to scores on other tests or to real-life outcomes. If the patterns match across different studies, it shows that the test is measuring what it's supposed to. Evidence based on consequences of testing. This evidence based on consequences of testing evaluates both intended and unintended outcomes resulting from using an instrument. Researchers assess the benefits or liabilities that arise from using the instrument, such as improved classroom instruction or student attendance. This form of evidence provides insight into the broader impact of testing beyond its intended purpose. Do the instrument's data recording procedures fit the researcher's questions or hypotheses? The answer is yes. To choose a good instrument, its data recording method should match your research needs. Participants might give you the information themselves, like tests or surveys. Alternatively, the researchers could record it through observation or interviews, letting participants provide the data saves time. But if the researcher records it, they can ensure better quality. So what is scales of measurement? So scales of measurement are the options provided to respond to questions, measuring variables in either categorical or continuous units or continuous scales. So the types of scales of measurement has two basic types. The first one is the categorical scales. These categorical scales are measurement scales where responses are categorized into distinct groups or categories. Each response option represents a separate and mutually exclusive category without any inherent order or numerical value. Example includes yes or no questions, multiple choice options. So there are two types of categorical scale. The first one is the nominal scale. A nominal scale is the simplest form of categorical scale, where responses are categorized into distinct groups without any inherent order or numerical value. Each category represents a different attribute or characteristics, but there is no meaningful ranking. For example of this includes gender, the male or female, ethnicity, if it is whether it is Asian, African, American, or anything, or it could be types of fruits like apple, banana, or orange. And the other one is the ordinal scale. An ordinal scale is a type of categorical scale where responses are categorized into distinct groups with an inherent order or ranking, but the difference between the categories are not necessarily equal or quantifiable. Examples include ratings of satisfaction such as very dissatisfied, somewhat satisfied, or neutral, somewhat satisfied, and very satisfied. Or it could be in educational levels such as high school diploma, bachelor's degree, master's degree, and doctoral degree. The second type of scale is a continuous scale. A continuous scale, also known as quantitative or interval scale, is a measurement scale where responses are represented by numerical values that have a meaningful order and consistent intervals between them. Unlike categorical scales, which have distinct categories, continuous scales allow for a wide range of possible values. These values can be divided into smaller intervals, and arithmetic operations such as addition, subtraction can be performed on them. An example of continuous scale in research could be measuring the level of anxiety in individuals where respondents rate their anxiety levels on a scale of 1 to 10. Each point of the scale represents the different level of anxiety, and respondents can select any value within that range, allowing for a wide range of responses. There are two types of continuous scale. The first one is the interval scale. An interval scale is a type of measurement scale where the intervals between values are equal, and it allows for comparison of the magnitude of difference between values. One of the examples of this is a Likert scale. It is a type of rating scale commonly used in surveys and research to measure attitudes, opinions, and perceptions. It represents respondents with a series of statements or questions and asks them to indicate their level of agreement or disagreement on a scale, typically ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The next one is a ratio scale, also known as true-zero scale. It's a type of measurement scale where responses have a true 0 point and equal distances between units. This means that the scale includes a meaningful 0 point, and the intervals between values are consistent. Example includes measurement like weight, the height, the time, where 0 represents the absence of the measured attribute, and equal intervals between units allow for meaningful comparison and arithmetic operation. The next one is the combined scale. A combined scale in educational research refers to the use of both categorical and continuous scale in measurement. So this approach allows researchers to capture a wide range of responses and variables, enhancing the depth and richness of data collected. By combining different types of scales, researchers can gain more comprehensive understanding of the phenomena under study and employ a variety of statistical techniques for analysis. How will you administer collecting data? So when collecting data, make sure to follow standard procedures and ethical rules. These ensure consistency and reliability in a data collection while respecting the well-being and rights of participants. So the standardization is crucial in various data collection methods such as questionnaires, surveys, interviews, and observations. It ensures consistency and comparability of data across individuals and cases. Written procedures and consistent training help maintain standard practices, whether it's conducting interviews, observations, collecting public documents. Ethical issues. Data collection should be ethical and it should respect individuals' insight. When collecting data, it's important to be ethical and respectful. This means getting permission before starting to protect people's privacy by keeping their information confidential and respecting their decision if they choose not to participate. Also, researchers need to be mindful that their presence may disrupt the site they are studying, like classroom, so it's crucial to communicate clearly and minimize any disruption.